This will be the story of a fanciful portrait quilt of my niece Maia Luna. Mostly these days I'm attracted to animal subjects for my quilts, but back in the early 1990s I did begin work in fabric collage with portraits. Those quilts are quite different from how I work now, but it was where I started, and every so often I get inspired to return to a human subject, or in this case, a human hybrid subject. Maia was the kid who found and nurtured the abandoned baby rodents, but both she and my son Sam participated in finding monarch caterpillars and raising them to release as butterflies. As I got thinking about a 50th birthday gift for my sister, knowing that her daughter would soon be flying away from home, the thoughts of Maia as she was then and now, with her beautiful hair, plus monarch wings for flight, all combined into a portrait that I needed to make. Tracing the photos, then enlarging the line drawings to mesh together, gave me the basics to begin. At one point in time, if you were to have asked Maia what her favorite colors were, she would have replied blue and green. So that's where I started with her coloration, all part of the story. Potential fabrics were cut down into maneuverable sizes, and I started auditioning where they'd best work to create highlights, shadows, and contours on her face, taking advantage of the color, value, and prints I found in the fabrics. As I continued to work on the face, more fabrics get added to the initial fabric selection. I found a nice light green cluster of flower petals for the highlight of her cheek, but I was happier when I thought of adding yellow to the mix and gave her some sun-kissed highlights instead. The photo in the upper right shows 3 pieces I cut from that yellow fabric, using the curves I saw in the print as cutting guides. One piece fit nicely for the curve of her cheek. The others got cut down farther as needed for other highlights to come. I like the idea of working in drafts, first, second, and third, on any creative endeavor. It means you don't have to consider it done on the first time around. In fabric collage, once the foundation fabric is covered, the first draft is done. Will I add to or change things before the end? Yes. But the first draft of her face is done, and now, before I overthink it, I move on to her hair. I look for fabrics with flowing prints. Mostly, I needed darker values for her dark hair, but also lights to catch her wavy highlights. On the left are a couple samples of selected fabrics, cut into pieces following the prints, then cut down farther and rearranged on the drawing. I felt I had a lot of leeway with Maia's hair. Wavy, lush, and fanciful was the look I was going for. At the beginning of every project or every part of a project, such as the hair, you enter what I call the messy, scary stage, where there's a piece of this and a piece of that, and it just doesn't tie together yet. But you have to keep at it and keep adding more. It's still the first draft, there's still foundation fabric showing, so you don't have to panic yet either. I cut out clumps of peacock feathers and bold and graphic curls, giving some nice dark values and some wind-swept movement to her mostly imagined head of hair. And then, good enough for now, the hair is done. I skipped over the first draft of her shoulders and body. I was anxious to get going on the wings. Monarch butterfly coloration is orange and black with white spots, but I knew from years of raising these butterflies that each had variations, and the oranges especially could range in values from darker red-orange to bright yellow-orange. Above you see my initial selection of fabrics. Below they're cut down in order to move them around and further trim to fit. Note the novelty prints of Cheez-Its and oranges, adding some kids' food to the mix. The orange coloration on the wings are very well-defined shapes, each to get filled with multiple pieces of a variety of orange fabrics. This way I can individualize each shape with the dark to light value range I saw on my butterflies. These dabs of orange fabric get pinned, trimmed to the outside edges of each outlined shape, and eventually tacked in place with a smearing of glue. Once the orange shapes are done, white spots, cut to include the black background surrounding them, were also pinned and tacked in place, which you can see in the upper left. The outside edges of all these bits of fabric are left free of glue, since the next step is to slip the black of the wings under the defining spots. Black can have a lightness and darkness to it as well, especially on wings that may be catching the light. The prints I selected tell a little more about Maia. There's snowflakes and blueberries, night skies, music, and spirals to represent new beginnings. Later, I added bat prints and a fabric printed with the words fly. The lower section of the front butterfly wing was done first, since it was in front of the other wing parts. This way, I didn't cover up any of my defining wing lines as I moved toward the back of my subject. The upper edges of a monarch wing have a few larger white spots, so these were collaged along with the other color variations prior to the black fabrics filling in the gaps. The third and final wing part was just the tip of the second wing showing up behind Maia's head. I selected more of the darker valued orange fabrics to make it appear shadowed by the head and other wing. Using the value of a color can help provide a sense of depth. Darker values recede, lighter values appear to come forward. As with every section, cut, place, trim, glue. The first draft of face, hair, and wings are now done. Usually I'd be collaging the body now to finish up my subject. However, I skipped over it again, in lieu of the background this time. Thinking of potential backgrounds, I had the fortuitous opportunity to visit Mickey Lawler and her sky-dye line of hand-painted fabrics. So I cut away all the foundation fabric around Maia's figure and wings in order to place her directly onto some hand-painted possibilities. With an hour or two of playtime with friends, I unfolded piece after piece of gorgeous fabrics, auditioning and photographing them to show my sister later. In addition to a few other choice pieces, I came home with the fabrics pictured in the lower right. In the end, with my sister's input, Maia's background included only one piece in the lower left of Mickey's fabric. Oh well, backgrounds can be tougher to decide upon than you'd think. But if you stick with a story of your subject, it can help with the selection process. Maia loves the outdoors and ocean, so the hand-painted sky and sand dollar print were in. She likes her hippie Birkenstocks, so the tie-dye-like starbursts were in. And the central tie-dye by another fabric artist reminded my sister of the big wall of windows in their home. So that completed the first draft of the background. And finally, all that was left to cover up the rest of the foundation fabric was the little bit of Maia's body. If Maia has monarch wings, she should have a monarch body as well, at least as an influence of fabric choices. Bolder black and white prints stood in for the large white spots, which I felt would have overpowered her portrait. Besides, the more fabrics I can use, the better. Now the first draft of the collage is done. The second draft involves going back to each area and fixing it up, making corrections, adding more details. In this close-up of two wing parts, the lower wing has bits of sparkle tulle netting, sequin netting strips, and petals of white lace, added to enhance the color or light-dark values of the first draft fabrics. The netting also blurs the raw edges of all the little pieces of fabric and sort of blends it all together. I think you can see what I mean if you compare the second draft lower wing to the first draft upper wing. Here's a comparison of first, second, and third drafts of Maia's face. Each step has a few more fabrics added, and especially a variety of nettings for shadows and highlights. I didn't show this work in progress to my sister or Maia too many times, but her nose came up each time as a minor issue. It was too wide. It stumped me for a while since it looked just like that original photo I had worked from, but it did seem a little wide to me too. Then it hit me. Maia was 8 or 9 years old in that photo I based my drawing on. She was now 20. She had an adult's nose. And the comparison of how she looked now to the portrait was throwing off our perceptions. So now look at her nose as it progresses from child to teen to young adult in the drafts. A little metamorphosis and everyone's happy. And now a focus on the hair. After seeing the first draft on the left, Maia said she liked the curls and feel free to add more. All right, I can do that. Second draft has more curls, bits of black netting for shadows, some gold netting for highlights, and an aqua heart tucked into the waves of hair off the upper left of her forehead. And why stop there? In the third draft, I added even more. This photo, a detail of the finished quilt, shows the final changes and additions I made to the third draft. Basically, she got sprinkled with fairy dust. This portrait quilt was years in the making. My sis just turned 53, and she'll soon, finally, be getting this portrait. It got set aside for other things. But in the end, that turned out for the best. On my last teaching trip, before I had reserved some time to finally finish this portrait, I happened to find the finishing touch in a fabric store about 2,000 miles from home. The white curls you see in her hair, originally glittered lines embedded in an opaque organza, now fussy cut and glued in place, gave the final highlights to Maia's hair, her crowning and glittering glory. Without planning on it, this quilt evolved from a fanciful portrait of a child to a young woman becoming who she's going to be, with some magical realism thrown in. My Monarch Maia.